I want to introduce today two people who I find very interesting. I have Curtis Wetton here, who is the president of, and let me get this straight, the El Paso, Texas Mount Franklin Stake, which is part of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. And I also have Wayne Carbajal, who is one of the few paid employees of the church, and he oversees the education of the young men and women here in town. In the I want to apologize for this right as we keep talking. I was brought up with the term Mormon, and in researching this, I found out that that is not a term that really should be used anymore. So if we're referring to the church, that's a term I can use, or I can say the Church of Jesus Christ, but we're going to try not to use the term Mormons today. We certainly want to be respectful of anybody in any religion that we have on this program. So I want to, if I make that mistake, bear with me, but I don't want to use that term. I'm going to try and use the term the church. So Curtis, hello, and Wayne, hello. How are you guys today?
It's great to be with you, Bob. Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
Happy to be here.
Because I learned so much about this. I'm still so confused, but I learned so much about the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. And by the way, that's why we're going to refer to it as the church, because that's too much to say. So let's start off. We were chatting before we started.
Yes.
Let me start with you, Wayne. Explain what you do in town, because again, you are an actual employee of the church.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. So I am a employee of the church. I am what do you call a seminary coordinator in the church, and also an institute director. So I work for the seminaries and institutes of religion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So what that means is I coordinate all of the education, church education of the youth. That's any ninth grader through 12th grader in high school. That's called seminary. And so I coordinate the teachers and help train and administer that program. And all these teachers, by the way, are volunteers, and I work with them to help them to teach the gospel to the youth.
So you teach the teachers teach the youth.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I support them, I answer questions, and I'm in constant contact with them.
And something else I found interesting about your background is you were born in Uruguay.
Correct.
Is that correct?
In Uruguay.
And
correct.
You're correcting my pronunciation, but you're fluent in Spanish.
I am fluent in Spanish.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And Curtis, so you then are the president, I think I said this before, of the stake, correct?
Correct.
So would you just give us a quick rundown of kind of, I know there's terms, the stake, the ward, the chapel, the temple, that sort of stuff.
Sure. You bet. So in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we're organized geographically. The stake is a term that is comparable to a Catholic diocese.
Okay.
It's a geographic region. My stake here in El Paso comprises the west side of El Paso, from UTEP to Anthony, New Mexico. And within that, we have 8 congregations, or equivalent maybe of the Catholic parish,
right,
where members meet, and they meet in meeting houses or chapels, we call them, on Sunday and for interweek activities. In our stake, geographically, there are approximately 3,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, within El Paso, there are 2 additional stakes, one in central El Paso and one on the east side of El Paso. And each of those stakes also have 7 to 8 congregations that meet there. In total, there are 10 meeting houses between Anthony and Fabens, Texas.
The meeting houses, chapels. And just out of curiosity, so you said there's one on the west, central, and east. What about the northeast?
That's part of the central.
Okay.
So it covers the northeast and central El Paso.
Something else and you also were born in, you not also were, but you were born in Mexico, right?
I was, correct.
So you also speak fluent Spanish. Are there a lot of church members who are native Spanish speakers?
Yes, there are. In El Paso, there are 23 total congregations, and 10 of those congregations are Spanish-speaking congregations.
Really?
Yes.
But you could, and so you're bringing up a good point. The church, like you're the president, you're the education director, those terms may not be perfectly correct, but it's all sort of lay-led. Is that correct?
All of the local congregations are lay-led. That's correct.
And who chooses those people to be the lay leaders?
So the responsibility, for example, for myself, I am the one responsible to call new bishops. Bishops are our equivalent of pastors.
Okay.
Or priests.
Priests, yeah.
And they oversee the local congregation. And so that's my responsibility to seek that revelation from our Father in heaven, from God, as to who he would have lead the local congregation. That typically is for a period of 4 to 5 years.
And so, I mean, really, what we're doing here is we're trying to introduce the community to the different religions here. I had no idea that there were as many church members in El Paso as you indicated to me there are. I think you said there were about 10,000 church members here.
Correct.
So if it's lay-led, and you kind of, I'm assuming you kind of pray about it as to who should be the bishop, let's say.
Exactly.
But it's voluntary, correct?
It is.
So if you went to somebody and asked them to be a bishop, they have the option of saying, I'm just too busy to do it right now. Isn't that?
Yes, they could.
Yeah.
They could.
Yeah. Okay. And so is there a way people move up in the church?
No, it doesn't really work that way. Each of us are equal before our Father in heaven, before God, and we each are volunteers, and we are each given different assignments at different times in our life. And you serve in those callings or positions for a period of time, and then you're asked to do something else.
So let's talk about the assignments for, I want to stick with you, but then I want to go back to Wayne for a minute. Who asked you to be the president?
So when I was asked to be the president, it was 2 of the general leaders of the church from Salt Lake City that came down and met with my wife and I, and met with many other different couples in the stake in our diocese, and they prayed about it, and they came back and said,
and asked you to do it.
We'd ask you to do it.
Did you have to be? And again, I don't think, I think most people in town are unless you happen to be a church member, are ignorant of sort of how it happens. So, in most organizations, you have to work your way up. Did you have to be a bishop first?
I was a bishop before I was asked to serve in this position, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. And again, right now I am going to use the term Mormon because I volunteer at a place called the Kelly Food Bank. And all of a sudden I see all these really very nice kids, both young men and young women were there helping. I mean, but I was so impressed. And so I started talking to them, and it turned out that at that time I referred to them as Mormons. And we were just talking, and they were talking about how they were assigned here for their mission. So tell us a little bit about missions, and if you've been on a mission and where it was and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I'm glad that they were nice.
Oh my God,
that's important.
They were. I guess that was the right term. My God, but they were really, really excellent people.
Yeah, and we believe they represent Jesus Christ, and so they usually, young men will go out at 18 or 19 for 2 years, and young women 19 or after that for a year and a half. Wherever they live, they will speak to their bishop, for example, or their stake president, and they will say, "I'd like to go serve a mission." And then there's a process that goes about that, and they get called to serve a mission into a geographic area. For example, I got called when I was 19 to serve in Spain, in Barcelona.
Oh, tough assignment.
Beautiful country, beautiful, wonderful people. Yeah, and I was able to serve there for 2 years and speak in Spanish and Catalan as well. a
Right.
little bit. And so I did that for 2 years. There was about 170, 180 missionaries in that geographic mission. Covered about, eastern Spain, Barcelona, all the way down to the south of Spain. So
is there any, were you chosen to go to Barcelona, do you think, because of your facility with Spanish, or?
that's a good question. So, we believe in revelation from God. So I was called to serve there by inspiration.
Right.
However, when you put into your paperwork, you put, do you know any languages? It asks those questions, or have you lived abroad? Questions like that. Your situation, your interest in other languages, and I of course put bilingual from Uruguay. I do love learning languages. You put those things, and that does come into consideration. President Wett knows probably more about that process than I do, but.
Well, I'm going to ask him in a minute, but I'll tell you, if I got Barcelona, I'd be running around waving it in the air. Guess where I'm going?
Yeah.
So go on, pick it up from there, will you?
So it's just totally dependent on the revelation that's received for that individual. We believe our Heavenly Father will send them where He needs them to be. For example, we have some friends whose son already spoke Spanish and whose son spoke Portuguese. He was just assigned to serve in Mongolia. So, it just totally depends on where the Lord needs to send you.
That in itself, I think, is incredibly interesting, that you have missionaries in Mongolia.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the church and the number of members that are in Mongolia?
I don't know the details, no. I believe, based on the number of stakes there, though, I believe there's probably 6,000 to 8,000 members.
Really? Mm-hmm. I think in some of the stuff that I asked you to send me and the information I looked at, maybe there are around 17 million.
That's correct. Worldwide.
Church members worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fascinating where they are. What's the fastest, do either of you know, the fastest growing area for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't. It's growing very quickly internationally.
Right.
Of the 17 million members, about 6.8 million members are within the United States.
Okay.
But the majority of the members of the church now are international.
Isn't that something? Mm-hmm. Where did you go on your mission?
I served in the Bay Area in California.
Well, that's another one I'd be waving in the air. That's great. All right, so where did I want to go back, because people are familiar with the term Mormon.
Yes.
And even though we know that that's not the appropriate term anymore, where did that term come from?
So it comes from the scripture, the book of scripture that we use in addition to the Bible. As members of the church, we believe in the Bible, we teach from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and love it. In addition, the Lord has also revealed additional scriptures, records of His people. For example, the Book of Mormon is the record of the people that lived in America during the time of Christ. They left Jerusalem about 600 years before Christ was born and came to this continent. And they kept records and journals, and those writings and stories were recorded and then translated in the 1800s, 1820s, by the prophet Joseph Smith.
Right.
And compiled, and one of the historians that kept the record anciently in America, his name was Mormon. And he's the one that compiled all of the journal history and put it into one book. And so the book carries his name, the Book of Mormon.
That makes sense.
And that's where the term Mormon came from.
And that also makes sense why the church wouldn't be referred to.
Correct.
As, yeah. So something else, I always knew this, I think, that it's a relatively recent religion. It dates from 1830,
That's
is
correct.
that right?
That's correct.
And it started in upstate New York.
Correct.
Something I didn't know, and actually something that's becoming there's sort of a pattern for me in researching these different religions, is all of the tough times that y'all went through. I mean, there was something called the Mormon Wars, I think. And didn't you start, it started in upstate New York and then went to, I don't know, the Midwest and then Illinois and all over the place.
So yes, the church was started in Fayette, New York, April 6th, 1830, with 6 members. From there, they moved to Kirtland, Ohio, just outside of Cleveland. They started building their community there, faced intense persecutions. They went to Missouri. From Ohio, Missouri, they relocated to Illinois on the banks of the Mississippi River and built a city they called Nauvoo.
Right.
And were there, and then eventually they were persecuted and chased out of Illinois as well. And that's when they immigrated to what became Utah, Salt Lake City.
It started out as Desiree.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that was in 1847 is when they arrived in Utah finally.
Why'd they change the name from Desiree?
That I don't know.
See, I'm a lawyer. I'm never supposed to ask a question I don't know the answer
I think
to.
it has to do with, Deseret in the scriptures means, honeybee. And so it's a very industrious word.
Right.
But I think when they applied for statehood, they changed Utah, more of a Native American name out in the Great Basin area. So that, I think, is the little bit of the history. Of course, I don't know everything either.
Well, of course.
But that's where I understood that Utah came from Ute tribe, et cetera. It means land of the mountains or something like that.
Yeah.
And so kind of interesting.
I don't think anybody knows everything about it, and I'm just asking these questions because I don't know much about it. But I think it's very interesting, and I'm hoping that it piques people's curiosity to learn about it. And the church member. Well, first of all, let me go back to Salt Lake and the headquarters.
Yes.
And explain a little bit about the governance of the church. Either one of you wants to take it. A little bit of the governance of the church from the headquarters in Salt Lake. And that's the international headquarters, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So the way the church is organized, it was restored through the prophet Joseph Smith. In 1820, he had the question of which church do I join? And he went into the Grove and prayed in upstate New York. And in response to that prayer, God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ appeared to him and called him to be the prophet to restore the church back to the earth. His calling as a prophet is very similar. It's the exact same as Abraham, Moses, Isaiah in the Old Testament times. Since that time, there has always been prophets on the earth. And the senior living apostle is the president of the church.
And who is that today?
Russell M. Nelson is the president of the church
Say
today.
that again?
Russell M. Nelson.
Okay.
He's the president of the church today.
And there have been very prominent church members involved in politics and governance, and Mitt Romney, I think, is a church member. And then I think there were a number of cabinet members that were church members, right?
Yes. Ezra Taft Benson was a member of the cabinet, Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah.
Yes, years ago. But members of the church are throughout society. They're doctors, dentists, military leaders, political leaders, entertainers.
Actually, I meant to tell a friend of mine, a lawyer, that we kind of started together. He converted to the church. He was brought up, I think, Catholic.
Okay.
But fell in love with a woman who was a member of the church and thought, well, I'll become a member of the church. I want to get married. It's very, I do. I find the whole thing just really interesting. When you teach, going back to your teaching, Wayne, so what do you teach from? You teach from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Book of Mormon.
Correct. I do. I teach the scriptures, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, words of the prophets, ancient and modern as well, starting from Joseph Smith on as well.
And and when you teach, you're teaching, it's sort of words to live by.
Correct.
It's the philosophy of the church.
Correct. Yeah, the teachings of the church. Yeah.
Where does Brigham Young come into this?
Brigham Young was the successor after Joseph Smith was martyred. Joseph was killed in Illinois. That's part of what drove the saints from Illinois to Utah. And Brigham Young was the prophet following Joseph Smith that led the migration to the West. So.
And BYU is Brigham Young University.
Correct.
Anybody can go there, though. Is
Absolutely.
that right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess it's like Brandeis or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, anybody can go.
Right.
So tell us, so there's not a temple. I want to talk about temples. Anybody listening, I think there should be a temple here in El Paso. Explain what a temple is.
So the temple is apart from our chapels
Yeah.
where we go to worship on Sunday and during the week. The temple is a building where the highest sacraments of our church take place, primarily the marriage of a man and a woman for eternity. One of the basic beliefs of the church, let's start back up a little bit. The basic beliefs of the church are that we are all children of our Father in heaven, of God, and that through making covenants or promises with him, and by living those promises, we can qualify to return to live with him because of Jesus Christ.
You're talking about after death.
After death.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do in temples primarily is create family units that survive after death. And we believe that we have the opportunity to return and live with our Father in heaven as families.
And the closest temple is Juarez, is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
So where a temple is that based on population?
Primarily it's based on, yes, the number of members and access to the temple and that will use the temple.
So if there are approximately 10,000 church members here, do I assume correctly that there's more than 10,000 church members in
That's correct.
Juarez or northern Mexico?
That's correct.
Huh.
Yes.
Is there much, so if one of your kids wanted to get married, you would go to Juarez to the temple for that ceremony to take place. Is that correct?
Correct. Or they could go to any temple.
I think you said Albuquerque or...
There's one in Albuquerque, there's one in Tucson, Phoenix, Mesa. So
I want to say that's just not fair. So you could go to any...
Yes.
Now, and I think you also told me this, and I think this is probably true of a lot. I mean, like, I can't take communion at a Catholic church, but only members of the church are really allowed to go into the temple. Is that right?
members of the church who are in good standing with the church.
Okay.
They have to be living the promises that they've made.
So that's interesting, the way you say. Explain that a little more, either one of you again. Because how would you know I wasn't living according to the tenets of the church? Unless I was very obvious about it. I mean, if I was laying on the ground drunk, yeah. But otherwise, how do you know?
Otherwise, we take your word for it.
Okay.
And follow the Spirit. We take your word for it.
Oh, I don't know if you want to take my word for it. But it's interesting, I think, the way you said that, a member in good standing. So it really is up to that individual to maintain the tenets of the church, live their life in accordance with.
Correct.
And I do apologize. We're talking about so much here. So it's Sundays that you go to the chapels for formal services.
Yes.
So is that part of it? I mean, would you be in good standing if you were, let's say, a good person, but you didn't happen to go to services on Sundays?
There are many reasons why people might not be able to attend services on Sunday. For example, their employment may require it.
Right.
As long as they live the promises, the tenets of the gospel, they can enter the temple.
That's pretty nice. Mm-hmm. But again, that's limited to church members, right?
Correct.
Okay. So
correct.
I'm not a member of the church. I could, even if my best friend's kid was getting married, I would have to wait for that particular part of the service to be over and then go to a party not in the temple.
Yes, that's
and
right.
Does that happen often?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
And where would, I know it could be any place. I mean, it could be a country club, it could be a hall. Could it also be in one of the meeting houses or chapels?
Yes.
Okay. And I could go there.
Absolutely.
Could I go to, if I were curious, could I go to a service at a Mormon chapel or no?
Absolutely. Everybody
Really?
is welcome to come to our
nice.
Sunday services and to our week activities.
I didn't know that.
You're always welcome.
Well, if you see me pop up there, I want you to say.
You bet.
Come
and join us.
That's very interesting.
Come and join
And
us.
that's part of what we're talking about here. I really, as I said in the intro, you shouldn't be ignorant about other people for any reason. You shouldn't be, because that just creates fear.
Right, sure.
Getting to know other people, getting to know what they believe, getting to know what they like, getting to know all about them. And religion is a big part of that. Gets rid of that fear.
Right.
I think brings people together.
Right.
So now that's nice. So anyway, let me get back to this whole list of stuff I have here. This is a misconception that people have now, I think. Originally, I guess I have to go back now to the term Mormon.
Okay.
There was polygamy.
Originally.
Now,
Correct.
there is no longer polygamy.
No.
It's a man has one wife.
That's correct.
There may be some fanatical people, but that they are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints.
That's absolutely correct.
That always puzzled me. I don't know how my wife puts up with just me, and then how I would put up with. I mean, that's kind of an interesting concept. Is it a fast-growing church?
We don't make any claims to be the fastest growing church or anything like that. We invite all to come unto Christ and to come to know the gospel. That's why we send out missionaries around the world.
Right.
Currently, there are about 72,000 missionaries serving around the world in different geographic locations. So we're always teaching and inviting people.
Well, I think that's how most people come in contact. If you're not born into the faith,
True.
how most people come in contact. This was something interesting, and I think we did talk about it, but I'm not sure that we ever came up with an answer. I haven't had a church member knock on my door in years. And the kids that I met at Kelly actually said to me, whether they were right or wrong, that they're really not doing that as much anymore. They're sort of serving the community. So, if they're in a community and they see some old couple, I ask them to come to mow my lawn, needed weeding, needed help, that sort of stuff. They were doing more of that. Is that your understanding, or?
It just totally depends on the area geographically where they serve. For example, here in the United States, a lot of people are not home during the day. They're working.
Right.
So to go knock on doors during the day, you're not going to find many people home. So it just totally depends on the area of the world that you're serving in. But their primary goal is to find people to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with and to invite them to come to know the Savior.
But also, you're really big in community involvement.
Oh, absolutely.
You'll help anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that these kids are like the best representatives. I could go, I didn't get to half my questions. I could go and go and go. I really want to thank both of you guys for coming here. I think you cleared up a lot. You explained a lot. I'm interested in it, and I'm hoping maybe we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Right.
Come and join us, Bob.
So
Thank you,
Wayne
Bob.
Carbajal,
Thank
Curtis Wetton, thank you guys. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.